Okay, turn it on. Welcome to High Gear Racing. Today we're going to take a look at one of the obscure jobs that we get. It's not something that we've done before, but we took it on as a bit of an experimental job in the hopes that we could develop a solution and a process to fix a certain type of broken steerer tube. So let's have a look. So obviously we've already completed the job and this is it all back together. But given the fact that we had to change the bearings anyway, I thought that we would film it coming apart and going back together and give a bit of an explanation about what we did to do this job. So as you can see here, hopefully the camera can focus on that, there's a slot at the front. So that allows for the internal cable routing to go through the handlebar, through the stem, and then into the steerer tube, and then down into the bike, obviously. So this is a top cap that we've made just to cover this original top part to the headset, because it's generally, or it's normally designed to work with a series of spacers that are particular to this bike. This is just a piece of Delrin machined to shape to suit it, just for an aesthetic cover and to stop dirt getting into the rest of the bike. That's the part that we've reused, and we've modified that a little bit to get away from the original shaped steerer tube stem clamping interface. This is another part which I'll show you closer on the bench later. It's also made from Delrin. It's just a custom taper lock mechanism that goes in the top bearing to give it a centering and adjustment. We'll just wipe a bit of this grease off. So unfortunately, we didn't do a lot of videoing or even take a lot of pictures of the process of completing this job, but this is definitely a first for us, and as far as I know, it's a first possibly in the world. I've never heard of anyone else doing a steerer tube replacement on a fork like this in this kind of way. But as you can see, it's pinned so that if there ever was any kind of failure, there's an inability for the steerer tube to spin or turn independently to the lower part of the fork that this assembly is attached to. This steerer tube actually consists of two parts. The main steerer tube actually goes down inside this part here to about here, which is about 50 mil penetration from the top of the tapered carbon section. This part here is actually an external cover sleeve which is pressed onto the aluminium, and it's machined to be the exact same angle as the taper on the carbon part of the steerer tube that was left over on the fork. So this is designed to support the inner press fitted part of the steerer tube into the carbon, to prevent any kind of cracking or failure, to give the carbon more support, and to overlap the internal bit by about 90%. Hopefully the camera will focus on this, but as you can see in there, there's actually a threaded section, and that allows for the top cap that we've made specific for this job to screw in to adjust the headset bearings. And then when the stem clamps, it actually fixes this in place, which disables it from being able to be unwound or adjusted in any kind of way. But it leaves access to not interfere with this. So we couldn't use some sort of plug to go in there for the top cap to screw into, and we couldn't use a star nut because it would obstruct the path of the cabling. So the main reason that we've actually pulled this apart is really just to put the new bearings in because they've just arrived. Because of the way that the internal cable routing is done through this type of interface, you really want to make sure you start off with good bearings because, like on a Cervelo, you've got to take the hydraulic lines out or disconnect them from the bike in order to pull the fork out to get to the headset bearings. So in that regard, it is a little bit of a frustrating design, but we're not the first people to create that kind of annoyance, and I doubt we'll be the last. Probably the most important part to explain that I almost forgot is this is the original steerer tube that came off the fork. So here is the entry point for the internal cabling to go through the fork. But what actually led to this whole job being done in the first place, if you can see that, is the fork actually cracked where the stem clamps to it. We're guessing this is because of some sort of accident. The customer's not sure because he bought the bike secondhand in good faith that this was fine, only to find out that cracked. I believe he got some sort of refund from the customer or a discount, I'm not sure, I can't remember. But nevertheless, that's what led to this whole job taking place in the first place. This is a bit of a known problem actually with these forks, where the way that it clamps and the way that this is shaped, it's not a very strong shape, and this puts a lot of uneven clamping pressure on this not so strong carbon part. It's a bit of a design failure. So to give you a bit of an idea of the parts that we made for this, which wasn't limited to just the parts we made to fix this part, but we also had to engineer some other things to allow us to do the job in the first place. So before I go into those, I'll give you a bit of an idea of what they are through here. So this is a active steady, which moves with the carriage on the lathe, which you'll see in a video that we'll cut in a little bit for your viewing pleasure. Okay, turn it on. Is as standard. We just machined a reference face, which you can see the edges of there and there, for this part that we made to go on there. So what this part here does is this houses a headset bearing, and it locates on the tapered fitting that the bearing would normally locate on. And so when that's in the lathe, that allows this to be supported so that machining can take place on this and maintain proper alignment. So that's one of the parts we had to make. It's actually a fairly complicated part. Took quite a bit of time to do. Yeah. And so what works in conjunction with that part is this Delrin, sorry. setting tool. So that allows this to go into the chuck to find dead center, to then position this referenced dead center to the chuck, and then allow us to bolt this to the steady while maintaining alignment. It just sort of shortcut the whole process, made it a lot easier to do. This was another bit of a thing that we had to make for putting the fork in the lathe to do the machining. It's really just a axle mount for a like a ute tray that we've machined out to 12 millimeters, and then we've just made up this plate with some adjustment on it so that we could mount that bracket to this part, which this part can then be fixed to the lathe chuck, and that created a point of reference for our fork. So all that stuff had to be done before we could even start this job, not knowing whether the job would work or not. So quite an enterprise. So apart from that, we machined up this steerer tube, and like I said originally, the steerer tube is actually just that part, and then it's an internal fitting into this. This is a separate part that was made to be external and to bolt the external part to the internal part through the carbon. And here, over about a 20 millimeter interface, is actually a press fit collar. So this is actually pressed to that so that it's only bonded to this. That's a Delrin top cap that we made for the headset plate. That's the Delrin top cap bearing fitting that locks into the bearing. And everything that we've made is a nice tight fit for everything. And this was the top cap threaded assembly. And we anodized it black just to keep it looking pretty. Okay, so we're just going to put this back together. Now this isn't actually the customer's stem, it's just one that we've used just to allow us to put the whole thing together. I believe he's going to have something that's going to sit into this a little bit more nicely and integrated. Okay, well I hope you enjoyed that. It's a little bit of an insight into some of the obscure work that we get here. We plan on making quite a few more videos to try to give you a broader perspective of some of that work. Hopefully you find it interesting. Thank you.